Securitate. Un fel de bună ziua al zilelor noastre. Cu un război la graniță, cu drone care cad pe teritoriul nostru, cu o investiție în apărare care în documente apare cu 2,5% din PIB, iar în realitate e doar 1,6% din PIB, cu un război în continuă extindere în Orientul Mijlociu, cu axa răului, Rusia, Coreea de Nord, Iran, China, ultima în rol de mare lider și în același timp cea mai mare provocare pentru Statele Unite. Cât de în siguranță te simți? Cu un BRICS care încearcă să destructureze cărămidă cu cărămidă, brick by brick, dominația dolarului și a lumii democratice, cu războaie înghețate și conflicte care stau să izbucnească. Tu unde te situezi? În ale cui mâini este securitatea ta? Schimbările culturale, ceea ce ieri era o regulă, azi e de pus la zid. Religia care ne unea, astăzi ne dezbină, iar tehnologia care promite să ne apere, vine cu și mai multe provocări. Te mai poți simți în siguranță? America e lângă mine și e cu mine. Care este rolul ei în contextul geopolitic de azi? Vorbim despre securitatea României, a Europei, a Vestului într-o lume agresată sub pretextul multipolarității. Vorbim chiar acum cu cei care au stat la baza securității Statelor Unite ale Americii, Mr. and Mrs. Security, mai exact, Kathleen, Troia, McFarland și Robert Wilkie. Mr. Wilkie, Ms. McFarland, welcome and thank you for being here.
Well, thank you for having me.
It's an honor and a pleasure.
Doamna Kathleen Troia McFarland a lucrat în administrațiile Nixon și Reagan, a avut roluri importante în Consiliul de Securitate Național și Departamentul Apărării. În anii 1980 a servit ca secretar adjunct al Apărării pentru Afaceri Publice în administrația Reagan. În 2006 a candidat din partea Partidului Republican pentru Senatul Statelor Unite ale Americii în New York. A fost comentator politic la Fox News, acolo unde a dezbătut subiecte de securitate națională și geopolitică. A luat premiul Distinguished Service Award în 1985, care este cea mai înaltă distincție civilă a Departamentului de Apărare. Cel de-al doilea invitat, domnul Robert Wilkie, a fost secretarul afacerilor veteranilor între 2018 și 2021, s-a ocupat de problemele veteranilor în administrația Trump. A servit ca subsecretar al apărării pentru personal și pentru pregătire în 2017. A fost asistent special pentru afaceri de securitate națională în timpul administrației George W. Bush și este un avocat specializat în afaceri guvernamentale și probleme de apărare. I'm coming back to you again. Thank you and welcome here. Now all the eyes are on America, on the United States of America. The elections are just around the corner. And I do have just one question, as everybody is asking, who is going to be the next president of the United States of America? Ladies first.
Oh, definitely Donald Trump will be the 45th and the 47th president of the United States.
Definitely, no doubts here.
I think not anymore.
Okay.
I think that the trends are all favorable. The country's moving towards him, and yes, I think he'll win, and he'll win on election night. We'll know.
Okay, Mr. Wilkie.
Well, the once and future president of the United States will be Donald Trump. And what we've been seeing on the campaign trail is that his numbers continue to move in the right direction. And for the first time in his political career, we are now seeing him pull ahead in national polls, which means the polls of the entire United States. That has not happened to a Republican candidate since 2004. In the second administration of George W. Bush. She has been stagnant since the week after her convention. She hasn't moved. All of the polls point with one trend, and that is an eventual Trump victory. And when I left the country 2 days ago, President Trump was ahead in all of the 7 swing states. So that is a very important indicator of what we think will happen on Election Day.
Yeah, just before Donald Trump was speaking at Mar-a-Lago, I've been hearing just a piece of his speech. Now, if Donald Trump is elected, how is going to be his first day at the White House? I need to know first decisions to make and first people to call.
Well, I will defer to Secretary Wilkie, who is already working fast and furiously on what will happen on day one.
Well, I think you will see probably the most professional transition in the history of American politics. The president has been working feverishly in the last 2 years on how the first 100 days of an administration will go. It will be through a series of executive orders to change the trajectory of the federal government, to put an emphasis again on peace through strength, tell the world that we are increasing our defense budget to former Cold War levels. And I think the first calls will go out first to Mr. Putin. And that call will be very simple. And I'm not speaking for the president, but having known him, I'm guessing what will happen. I think the call will say, you either stop or we give Mr. Zelensky everything that he needs. On the Zelensky call, you have to think about coming to the table. And I think with those two calls, you will eventually get to a meeting of minds where I think Mr. Putin will have to think twice if he continues to press against the Ukrainians.
Ms. McFarland, do you agree? Is
Yes,
Putin the
absolutely.
first person to call?
First, he's going to say, drill, baby, drill. He's going to change some American domestic policies, energy policy, and then I think he'll turn to foreign policy. It's going to be a long day one. What I would point out, though, is because Donald Trump was not a traditional American politician, that he'd had a very successful business career in construction and hotels and entertainment, he also is considered one of the great negotiators in American business history. So he will look for opportunities to negotiate, particularly if it's an opportunity to negotiate an end of a war, whether it'll be in Ukraine, the Middle East. He will focus on diplomacy. And the other thing, to look at his background and what he's emphasized in his first administration, remember, we didn't have any wars during his first administration. If you look at President Trump's first term and compare it to President Obama's term or President Biden's term, nobody invaded Ukraine during Donald Trump's presidency. Now, he likes to say it was because he was so tough, and I think that's part of it. But it was also because he put the Russians in the position where they didn't have the money to invade. Because Donald Trump used energy was the focus of his first term foreign policy. He understood that the United States, for a number of reasons, but that the United States all of a sudden had the ability to produce energy, oil and natural gas, fracking, and that we could do it cheaper, cleaner, better than anybody else in the world, and we probably had 200 years worth of energy to supply the whole world. So he was able to use that great advantage that we didn't realize we had 10 years before because the technology wasn't there. But when President Trump's first term, he was able to then bankrupt Russia. He was able to bankrupt Iran. Why? Because he was able to drive the price of oil from $120 a barrel, where it was in the Obama administration. And when President Trump left office, it was $40 a barrel. So that cut the revenue stream of Russia and Iran by 2/3. So they couldn't go to war with anybody because they didn't have the resources to. So I think that on day one, that one of his first actions will be to resume those policies he had before that, sadly, President Biden chose to reverse. And as a result of Biden's decision to reverse the energy policy, what happened? Well, Russia invades Ukraine because they had the money to do it. Iran enables its proxies to invade and attack Israel. So when President Trump comes back in, he'll go back to the old energy policy. He'll bankrupt Russia. That's why when he has his first phone call with Vladimir Putin, he's not only going to say, go to the negotiating table, but he's also going to say, and by the way, you're not going to have $100 billion to pursue that war you want to pursue.
Okay, both of you said Vladimir Putin is going to be the first person to call when Donald Trump is going to be the next president of the United States of America. How about Zelensky? Why not Zelensky? Why not Netanyahu? Why not Xi Jinping? Why Putin?
Well, let's look at this as you just laid out the actors on the world stage. You can't look at Ukraine, you can't look at the Middle East without looking at China as well. These two actors, the Russians and the Iranians, feed China's global ambitions. If you weaken them, you weaken China. And one of the things that people refuse to admit about President Trump, not only did he not start any wars, but he sent very clear signals to the malefactors in the world when they got out of hand. For instance, when Russian troops got too close to American troops in the Syrian desert, and Putin was told to pull them back when he didn't, 300 of his men disappeared. The same applied to the Iranians. Not only did they end up with only $5 billion in their treasury as a result of President Trump's sanctions and his robust energy policy, but when they continued to launch attacks against Israeli and American interests, Soleimani, the world's leading terrorist, was also killed. So that is the kind of robust deterrence that we will see America return to. Peace through strength, but a strong America that makes sure there aren't any wars expanding. Now, he has a much better relationship with Netanyahu. When I was in the cabinet and went to speak in Israel, there were massive posters of Donald Trump and Netanyahu all over Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. He's probably thinking that the Israelis are taking care of things on their own. But again, they will need American assistance to make sure that the Iranians are no longer in a position to funnel funds to their proxies in Lebanon, in the Gaza Strip, and in Yemen.
Okay, we'll get to Israel as well. Now, I want to know, how would a Trump administration differ fundamentally from the current Harris-Biden administration?
You know,
right now?
It's a great question, because for the first time in certainly my adult lifetime, you have a very clear choice between the Republican candidate and the Democrat, and you have a track record. So you have Donald Trump, who's been president. We know what happened then: peace, prosperity, greatest period of economic boom in modern times. And then you have the Biden-Harris administration, and they have a record. And I think that when you look at the polls of the American people today, something like 75% of the American people think that the country's going in the wrong direction. Now, when that happens, usually the powers that be, you know, the president who's in power, the party that's in power, gets tossed out. And I think that's why I'm not only optimistic about President Trump's chances next week, but I also think it's a very clear choice for the American people. This is no ambiguity here. The people know what they're going to get. They know because they've seen it, and they're going to make a strong decision, and I think it'll go for President Trump.
Do you agree, Mr. Wilkie?
Absolutely, and I think this is a message that people in Romania would understand. What President Trump stands against are those very things that led to authoritarianism, totalitarianism, the repression of particularly Eastern Europe in the post-World War II era. And that is the coming of the all-powerful state. What Donald Trump promotes are those things that war against a repressive central government. He promotes the family. He promotes the freedoms of the church. He promotes the independence of parents and local schools to determine what they teach their children. He would also restore pride in the notion of America. One of the things that has happened with Biden and Harris, and it goes back to Obama, is that these are people who believe that most of the problems in the world are created by the United States of America. They are unable to defend our story rhetorically, which means they can't defend us kinetically if we are put in a situation where we have to use our military might. And those are fundamental things that Donald Trump believes in and would restore on day one, that would put America back on a path that would have been familiar to Dwight Eisenhower, Harry Truman, Richard Nixon, and Ronald Reagan. And that is, America is a special place. It is the indispensable nation, and that we are a force for good, the likes of which the world has never seen.
Let's look further when it comes to, okay, Trump is the president. He's going to be the president, as you both say. Yeah. All right. Let's look at the U.S. foreign policy right now, because you've been witnessing the last decades of U.S. foreign policy. You've been involved in that. What will U.S. foreign policy regarding Eastern Europe will look like in this case?
You want to go?
Well, let me start by talking about the changes that Donald Trump brought to Europe.
Sure.
First of all, he insisted that those who have been building social welfare states on the backs of the American taxpayer, particularly the nations of Western Europe, that they began to live up to their commitments within the NATO alliance, that they begin to spend at least 2% of their GDP on defense. I'll give you an example. It's not Western Europe, but our neighbors to the north, Canada. When I was born, the Canadians had the 4th largest army in NATO. Today, their army is about the size of the Alabama National Guard. And for Romanian viewers, each state has its own militia. It's in the Constitution. They started during the Revolution. That's about 23,000 people. Canada is no longer a military power on the globe. But what Trump did was recognize the importance of Eastern Europe as the front line of NATO, and the front line of not only American security, but international and Western security. He moved the most important road from Paris to Berlin to Warsaw to Bucharest. You are on the front lines. And unlike Obama took troops out of Europe. Donald Trump began rotating troops into Eastern Europe. He promised air defense systems for Romania. He promised more of an Air Force presence in Eastern Europe, all with the goal of deterring Putin. Biden and Harris have pulled back on that. They are ashamed of American power. They want to revert back to the foreign policy of the 19th century, which says that Paris and Berlin are the most important actors on the continent of Europe. That has no semblance of reality in that approach to foreign affairs.
You've mentioned several times NATO. So when we are looking at NATO's commitment, how much will demand Trump for each state member in NATO to get into defense from GDP? So I want to quote Donald Trump right now, right? For years, all these NATO countries have spent much less than 2% of their GDP on their armies. Now he's requesting 3% of GDP of each state member in NATO, right? Do you stand by that? Or do you want to, I don't know, stay at that 2.5% as it is right now? How do you see that?
Well, look, first of all, a lot of countries aren't at even 2%.
Right.
That's true.
So those are the countries that Donald Trump has lectured. Now, people have said, oh, well, Donald Trump doesn't support NATO because he's critical of these countries. It's just the opposite. What Donald Trump wants is a stronger NATO because he's saying to different countries, not Romania, but Canada and others, you're not paying your fair share. And if this is a mutual defense treaty, then you need to step up. You have the ability, you have the finances, you have the wherewithal, but you're just not doing it. You're just freeloading. So stop freeloading. And then I think the point you like to make, well, I'll let you make the point about it's not just our allies who should step up, it's us.
It's us. Look, under
Us who? Us citizens?
United States.
Us, the United States, okay.
Under
Sure.
Harris and Biden, we have seen the most precipitous decline in American power, really in American history. We have seen the lowest recruiting numbers in our history for our armed forces. We are on a trajectory now, if Ms. Harris is elected, to reach 2% or less than 2% of GDP on defense. That's something the American nation has not experienced since the 1920s in the immediate aftermath of the Great War. If America does that, the rest of the West is in grave danger. So what I expect Donald Trump to emphasize to the American people, and he put it in the presidential platform of our party earlier in the year, is that we need to be back on the road to Cold War levels of spending for defense that came in somewhere between 4 and 6% for most of the post-war period. And that will send a signal to the world that we are serious about retooling and rearming. But we will insist also that those nations, particularly in the western part of Europe, well, I'll give you a quick example.
Please.
Fort Bragg, North Carolina, where I grew up, it's the home of the 82nd Airborne Division and America's Special Forces. It's the largest military installation in the free world. There are more American soldiers at Fort Bragg, which Biden calls Fort Liberty, than there are combined in the Royal Navy, Royal Air Force, and the British Army. That is dangerous for all of us, that the fifth largest economy in the world is losing its military power and its influence on events. It goes without saying that Germany and France are in that bucket. And the statistic that I like to use when France and Germany tell Eastern Europe that they're doing what they can, the United States of America's Department of Defense spends more on health care for the children of our soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines than France and Germany spend on defense combined. That is the reality that Donald Trump has faced and told the world that needs to be changed if we are to live in a safer environment.
You know, if I could just add on to what you're saying. So Donald Trump talks about peace through strength. Now, a lot of people say, oh, strength, that means a big military. But that's not all it means. And if you look at what President Trump did in his first term, the Trump defense buildup, he took a military that had been lagging, it really had not recovered from the wars in the Middle East. He rebuilt the military, emphasized technology, but he didn't then use the military to go to war. He used it for deterrence. His idea, as he showed us in the first term, was you want a strong military, not because you necessarily want to use it, but you want to make sure nobody dares challenge you. And that's exactly what happened.
If you want peace, you
have
want
strength.
Prepare for
exactly,
Prepare for war.
Prepare for war, definitely. But now I want to ask you something else. As a Romanian, I'm looking at my country's defense, right? So on paper, everything looks great. We are spending 2.5% of GDP, right? Just for defense. So we are okay. Actually, when you look into reality, you've seen that it's actually 1.6% of GDP. Therefore, if let's say all the member states in NATO will say, that's right, okay, Donald Trump says 3%, 3% it is. But in reality, these spendings are not actually spendings. They are just on papers. How are we going to solve that?
Well,
I'm going to turn that over to a man who is the number 2, 3, and 4 position in the Defense Department.
First of all, the Romanian people should be thanked.
Yeah.
Because
Why?
since the attacks on the United States in 2001, your nation,
You stepped up.
not a large nation, sent over 35,000 troops to fight alongside Americans in Iraq and Afghanistan. That is an incredible statement for a nation that had just come out of the throes and the vice grip of Soviet-style communism. And it is a statement about your belief in freedom and in the values of the West. My answer to the people of Romania, and I've said this to your political leaders, is that we can't allow you to do this alone. What the United States has to do is retool. We have to replenish our military, things that are simple, like artillery shells and precision-guided munitions, and give you the opportunity to take those munitions and military materiel from us to replenish your numbers. We also have to be more involved, as we were for most of the Cold War for Western Europe and for our allies in Asia, in helping train and give advice to Romanian forces, both in the air, on the sea, and on land, and more fully integrate Romanian forces into an American-led NATO military structure. It can be done, and those numbers will be raised when the United States raises its numbers and begins the production of those things you need to defend yourself.
But again, here in this situation, let's call it that way, the United States of America begins to look like a hero again, which it is nowadays, right? In this in this geopolitical context, definitely. But when we are looking individually at each state, right? In Romania, for example, I want my country to come here and say, okay, we are spending all those money. We're going to buy all those fighters, all the ammunition we need in order to prepare for peace, right? As we were talking before. We do not want to wait for the United States of America to come here, or Germany, or France, or any other states to teach us how to do it, or to show us the way. I want it to be individually. How are we going to do that? Well, and every country in Europe, okay? So it won't depend on the other countries.
Yeah, well, what I was emphasizing was military cooperation. Not the fact that the United States will be the be-all and end-all when it comes to leading the alliance. We're certainly the largest and most important player. But that level of military cooperation that we exhibited with the United States forces and Romanian forces against the Taliban, against ISIS, is the road that we have to follow. But I also see, because of Donald Trump's change in terms of his views on Europe and taking American policy out of the traditional State Department confined world of the Paris salons and the highway, the great avenues in Berlin to the east, you will see more American forces rotating through Eastern Europe and the Baltics. And what that does is give the opportunity for the people of Romania, the people of Poland, the people of Hungary, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, to more readily accept the partnership with the United States and to meet those levels. One thing Donald Trump did with NATO is that you saw, as a result of his leadership, more than 3/4 of the NATO nations all of a sudden began to hit 2% of GDP on defense. And I think with the threats that exist now, particularly from Putin's Russia, I think that will be a much easier sell. And I think more Europeans are waking up to that reality.
Ms. McFarland, Mr. Wilkie, let's look at the Ukraine right now. The war in Ukraine that Putin has started. Donald Trump has stated many times that he is going to end the war within 48 hours. Do you stand by that? Do you support the plan? And how the plan will look like?
Well, first of all, I never doubt anything that President Trump says.
Exactly.
because he has a track record of doing the impossible and the unexpected, particularly in American politics, because he is the unconventional leader. And in the lead up to the inauguration, I think you will see the beginnings of a change in American policy, as KT has said, certainly the return of American energy independence. I mean, we are faced with the lunacy of Biden-Harris policy, where we stop American production in the name of climate change and green energy. But by stopping American production, they then start buying essentially dirty oil from the dictator Maduro in Venezuela. It is an incomprehensible contradiction in terms of policy objectives on the part of this administration. So those things will be in train, and Putin will know that the end of his budget surplus will be coming. So I do expect on day one those calls to go out. And we have the advantage of having Putin having already confronted Mr. Trump and having lost on several fronts during the president's first administration, that I think, given the fact that he's losing 1,700 people a day, that's 4 days worth of North Korean conscripts that he's now brought into Russia. This is not the Soviet Union that Romania confronted with 300 million people. This is a gangster state with 180 million people, and he cannot sustain this at this rate of loss much longer. Donald Trump will recognize that, and I do expect things to change as a result of that first day in office and the calls that will be made, knowing what the track record has been.
How about territories? Just 1 second, and then you can both answer to that, because I'm curious now. Okay, about the people, we all know how war is going nowadays, but I want to know, in this victory plan or peace plan, you name it, I want to know, where is Crimea, where is Donbass, where is Lugansk, where is Donetsk, where is Mariupol, where is Zaporozhye, where are all those territories that now Putin states as his own, right? So are those territories now under Russians' occupation, or under Zelensky's
what I
country,
would say,
of
I'm
course?
not going to speak for any negotiations that President Trump hasn't entered into yet. But I think that the emphasis will be on Putin coming to the table and stopping his aggression. Now, what the trade-offs are, that will be up to the Ukrainian people, also up to Donald Trump to shepherd that agreement. But I think, again, given how he has interacted with Putin and how he brought the Russian economy to the point of collapse, I think Putin knows that this is not dealing with Harris and Biden or Obama. And as KT has pointed out earlier, there's a reason that Putin attacked Ukraine when Obama was in office. He attacked Ukraine when Biden and Harris were in office, because he had no fear that America would respond in any meaningful way.
You know, and the other thing to point out is that President Trump, when he's asked that question, you know, what about this, what about that? And he says, look, I'm not going to tip my hand. I'm a negotiator. I'm not going to tell you in advance. I'm not going to signal my moves. I would just say, look at his track record. He had a trade war with China, which he won. He had a peace in the Middle East, which nobody thought could happen, right? Arab-Israeli peace. You know, President Trump, in a moment of modesty, said, well, this hasn't happened in decades. Well, I would say it hasn't happened in millennia. Yeah. That President Trump was able to, out of the blue, nobody even knew it was happening, have a peace agreement with Israel and the other Gulf Arab states. And those agreements have held even as we've had the war, the proxy wars against Israel. And so I have an enormous amount of confidence. Sure, if somebody does something once, maybe it's an accident, maybe twice, well, they're going to kind of get lucky. But when they do it time and time and time again, he knows what he's doing. And we are not going to second-guess Donald Trump on how to negotiate. He's considered to be one of the greatest negotiators, as I said, greatest negotiators in business, and probably, certainly as a diplomat. Whoever knew he would be a diplomatic negotiator, but he sure has shown how good he is.
And I think Putin should read The Art of the Deal if he's smart.
Okay, let's see how it goes with that. Ms. McFarland, I want to ask you, let's move to another conflict, right, in the Middle East this time. Let's move out of Ukraine for a second. Does Israel hold all the cards in this war right now, today?
Well, if you look at where the situation was a couple of months ago, the Biden administration, Biden-Harris administration, they were willing to give Israel weapons. We have historically supplied Israel with weapons. Why? Because Israel's a small country. It can't make its own weapons. It has to make some of its own. It buys some of its own. But what has happened is that the Biden administration would say, okay, you can have these weapons, but don't use them for this, don't use it for that, don't go in here, don't do that. And thank goodness, at a certain point, Bibi Netanyahu, I think, decided, I've got to defend my country by myself, for myself. And so they didn't listen. So when the Biden administration said, don't go into Rafah, what did Netanyahu do? He went into Rafah. Well, guess who was in Rafah? The head of Hamas was in Rafah. Or when they said, you can have these weapons, but, don't attack anything in Lebanon. What turns out that, they went after the missile launchers in Hezbollah. And then the thing about Israel, and one of the reasons I think they have done so well in the last 2 months, is that they've used their digital weapons. That whether it was the pagers that went off, whether it was tracking where some of the Hezbollah and Hamas leaders were located and putting bombs in their apartment.
Drones, everything, yes.
Drones, taking out the missile launchers, destroying really the communications network. I mean, if you're in Hezbollah or Hamas, how are you going to talk to your other guys? You're not going to use your cell phone. You know that the Israelis are monitoring those. You're not going to use pagers. Well, you know what happened to those. They blew up in their pockets. So I think that Israel has established deterrence once again. And even in the last few days when they've responded to the Iranian attack, they've done it very in a measured way, that they went after Iranian military sites and intelligence sites, but not after Iranian energy sites, not after Iranian nuclear sites. So I think Israel's managed to reestablish deterrence, managed to give the message to the Ayatollahs, look, we can get the leaders of Hamas and Hezbollah in their apartments. We know where they live, and guess what? We probably know where you live, too. That's right. And so it's a deterrent to any adventurism that the Iranians might want to do themselves directly. And I would also say that just common sense would tell you, and then this is me speaking, not Donald Trump, but common sense would say if Mossad and the Israelis have penetrated the Iranian intelligence services and security services, they probably also know an awful lot about what's going on in civil society in Iran. And when Netanyahu said about 2 weeks ago, and he said, we have no argument with the Iranian people, the Persian people, and the Israelis have had a long period of peace and prosperity. We're looking for that again. We just don't like your leaders. Yeah. So I think that's where Israel has done so well. They've done it on their own. They've ignored the Biden administration. And as a result, I think they've reestablished deterrence against Iran, which is the real problem in the Middle East.
And I would say the answer to your question is they will hold all the cards if they have an American president who is willing to back them up and to willing to.
They don't have him now?
No, they do not have him now. Or a vice president who is constantly talking about the impact on Hamas. Give you an example. You mentioned Rafah. In Rafah, Kamala Harris went on television ad nauseum saying she was telling the Israelis not to go into Rafah because of the humanitarian cost. Well, Israel managed to evacuate 1.1 million Gazans from Rafah. Now, no other army in the world would do something like that when the existence of its nation is at stake. The British certainly didn't do that during World War II when they flattened entire German cities, regardless of who was there. But the Israelis have gone the extra mile, and guess what they found in Rafah? They found the leadership of Hamas. When they went into Lebanon, Biden and Harris told them, don't do it, it will spark a wider war. I don't know what their notion of a wider war is. I'm just a retired colonel in the Air Force Reserve. But I would say it's a wider war when you are fighting as a small nation on 7 different fronts, including a front that extends over 2,000 kilometers from your national capital. So they continue to astonish the world as they did in 48, as they did in 67. I think this is a plan of action that has staggered what I call the triumvirate of evil, the Iranians, the Russians, and the Chinese, because China is still the font of all of this. They give sanction to anything that Putin and Iran does. And it is up to the United States to back the Israelis in this, because destroying Hezbollah, destroying Hamas, and as KT said, what the Israelis are doing is recognizing that Iran is ripe for a revolution from within. Will they attack the instruments of regime terror like the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. I think the next time they attack, they will hit the morality police who are rounding up young women for not dressing properly. They will hit the secret police and the Baschis. Those are the armed thugs of the movement, the organized armed thugs of the movement, because the administration, the regime in Iran is very fragile. And only the Israelis have the gumption to recognize that and act on it.
The other thing I want to add one thing to that I think is really significant about a President Trump. Not only would he have Israel's back, but he will go back to what he said we did in the first term. He said, we bankrupted Iran. They had no money. They had the oil sanctions against them. They couldn't sell oil. And when they sold it, it was a really low price in the
They're now selling more oil than they did in the last year of the Shah.
At another price,
at a much bigger price. And so not only would President Trump have Israel's back, but President Trump, I think, understands that the real vulnerability of Iran is their economic vulnerability. And so target that. You know, peace through strength. It's not just military strength, it's economic strength, technological strength, and the strength of our allies.
And a very restless young population in Iran.
Yes.
Mr. Wilkie, you've mentioned China.
Yeah.
Is China the greatest challenge in the U.S. history?
I think it's, no, well, let's take a step back. You know, when World War II ended, we confronted a so-called ally whose ambitions and power we did not understand. We did not know its history. And as a result of that, we were locked in a dance for 70 years. The difference between the sclerotic Soviet Union and China is that the only thing that the Soviet Union offered the world was brute force. There was nothing in the Soviet system that any free person on the planet wanted to emulate. The Chinese are a much more complicated foe because, first of all, they have a long-term messianic vision that's different from the messianic vision of the old Soviet Union. But they have economic tools that Khrushchev and Brezhnev and Stalin could only dream of. And as a result, they have moved those economic tools into areas that they believe America has ignored. Africa, South America, trying to establish an alternate economic reality to that which has existed since the end of World War II with the dollar as the world's reserve currency. But China is also a nation that has incredible contradictions. There are 900 million of its citizens who live no better than their ancestors did 2,000 years ago. It has no energy. It is surrounded by nations that have thousand-year memories of Chinese aggression. The Japanese, the Koreans, the Philippines, Australia, Singapore, India are arming for what? To contain Chinese aggression. But without a robust American understanding that China seeks to foment problems across the globe to distract American attention from the Pacific, and by weakening Russia and by weakening Iran, we weaken China, then we are going to have a much more complicated set of problems than we had with the Soviet Union.
We've been seeing celebrities, we've been seeing all kinds of people in these elections when it comes to Harris' side, when it comes to Trump's side. Therefore, Elon Musk, of course, he was very controversial when it comes to Trump's meetings. He was present there, he was on stage, he went even with that Make America Great Again cap that he was wearing, he was jumping all around. Therefore, how do you see this alliance, if I might call it this way? Because we know Elon Musk was on Democrat sides years ago. Now we see he's changed his thoughts.
So I met Elon during the transition for the first Trump administration, met him at Trump Tower.
Okay.
And he was there with a number of, Silicon Valley guys. And, Trump was interested in him, they were interested in Trump, but it was not quite sure where we all fit in here. The difference now is I think that Elon Musk understands the threat to American democracy, that a free press, if it's not a free press, and there is suppression of free speech, which we feel that a lot of the legacy media in the United States has engaged in, where they've really thrown their weight in favor of the Democrats and Harris and Biden and against President Trump, that Elon Musk's first coming in and buying Twitter and then opening up the platform to conservative, liberal, everybody gets a chance to talk. But the second thing that's evolved in the last 2 months, I would say, is that Elon Musk had a long-form interview with President Trump, the kind of interview we're having now, where it goes for a long time, we have free-flowing thoughts. And during the conversation, Elon Musk said to Trump, you know, I think there's a lot of waste in government. And Trump said, well, would you like to come and help fix it? Look what you did with Twitter. You fired 75% of the workforce, and now it's a better organization than ever. And so Elon Musk said, yeah, maybe I would like to do that. Maybe that's a great idea. So the two of them now, in the last 2 months of the campaign, 6 months of the campaign, Trump has said that on day one, it's going to be a long day, but he's going to say to Elon Musk, I'm going to establish a Department of Government Efficiency, and I want you to head it, and I want you to go and look at the waste, fraud, and abuse of all these government agencies and help clean it up because you know how to do it. Right. And the other thing that Elon Musk has done in his conversations with Trump along the way is that he's changed the media landscape. So historically, or certainly in our lifetimes, right, it's always been the CNN, Washington Post, New York Times, NBC, ABC, all the legacy media that have determined, they've decided really who's going to be the candidate, who's going to be the president. They weighed in a really big way in American democracy. What Musk has done, and then others like him, is that they've introduced a new kind of connection to the voters, for the voters to see the candidates. So when Elon Musk has an interview, it's like yours. It's a long interview. You really get to know the candidate. There's no filter. And that's happened a number of times with Trump, and he's very good at it. Right. And he has a very broad, background, obviously in business, in entertainment, in politics, clearly now, and in diplomacy. And he's able to say directly to the American people, this is who I am, this is what I'm going to do. And so the connection between Trump and Elon Musk, which has then led to a connection between probably people that you're not as familiar with, but Bobby Kennedy Jr., who wants to have the healthcare issue be important in the United States, or Tulsi Gabbard, who has talked about, she's a military veteran and she's talked about forever wars, or Vivek Ramaswamy, who's talked about entrepreneurialism. So Trump is bringing in all of these people who are not typical government, same old hacks. He's bringing in really innovative, creative ideas. So it's not just anymore Trump versus Harris. It's Trump and the Avengers. He's got this team of superstars who are going to come in with him.
And that's the change. Yeah. It's not Kamala Harris who represents the tired, old, sclerotic superstate. It's somebody like Elon Musk. And we talk about government waste.
Well, she has Beyonce, she has Taylor Swift, she has Eminem, and all the others, right?
The great thinkers. But look at the Pentagon. When World War II ended in Tokyo Bay, we had 16 million Americans in uniform. Today, we have a little less than 2. We have more generals and admirals today than we had when Japan surrendered in August of 1945, even though the force is 1/7 the size of what it was when that war ended. And those are the kind, and my own Department of Veterans Affairs, the second largest department in government, we relieved of their duties over 8,000 employees, 2,000 for grievous misconduct. That's unheard of in the modern bureaucratic state. So what did Joe Biden and Kamala Harris do? They brought them all back with back pay, even the ones who were fired for putting veterans at risk. That's the kind of thing that Donald Trump is at war with, and that's also the kind of thing that this new thinking can help us in whittling down the size of government, because the larger government increases, the more it increases, the more likely that our individual freedoms become under threat. And that's why I always say when people say that Donald Trump is the new Mussolini, no. Mussolini took things over in the name of the state. He waged aggressive war. He promoted ethno-nationalism. Donald Trump promotes those things which are bulwarks against the power of the state, the family, the church, individual control, parents' control of the local schools and what their children read and don't read. Those are the things that has made America the success that it is. And those are the things that we need to enhance, or we will be swallowed by that all-powerful bureaucracy that Kamala Harris seems to promote every day.
Well, Ms. McFarland mentioned before mass media. You're a journalist. You know it. This is your playground, actually. I was looking earlier. It was a survey made by Gallup, and it states this. How much trust and confidence do you have in? First place, local government where you live. There are 67%. They do trust local government. Last place, it's mass media,
right,
with 31%. Why? What's the explanation?
Well,
Becomes so political.
KT pointed out when we were youngsters, we had three networks. Most famous was CBS News. Now, our parents knew that the leaders of CBS News were probably liberals, but they told the American people the straight story. So even in the days when John Kennedy and Lyndon Johnson and Richard Nixon were at the height of their popularity, there was one American who was more popular than any of them, and that was the leader of CBS News, Walter Cronkite, because he didn't give you his opinion. What Americans have witnessed now, are as KT has pointed out, are the old news organizations taking sides. If you don't believe me, look at the debates where Donald Trump is involved, and they actively take part on behalf of his opponents, to the point where they're even making up figures to throw at him in order to rebut his arguments. The most notorious was in the last debate with ABC, where the anchor interrupted Trump after he said that crime was on the rise. And the anchor said, no, according to the FBI, it's not. You're wrong. Well, guess what? The FBI had to come out a week later and say Donald Trump was right, that ABC was wrong, but they did it deliberately. And Americans are famous for one thing. On the sports field, anywhere, we do believe in fair play. And what they are seeing at their heart, in their hearts, they know it is not fair. And it is so egregious now that they're turning off these networks and going to alternative sources of media.
Let's look at US and Romania. A very big cooperation, decades, again, when it comes to our strategic interests. But what exactly are America's strategic interests in Romania today?
Well, let me start with the changes in America's relationship with Romania, but it is actually broader. It's what is the change in America's relationship with Eastern Europe. For most of America's history, even going back to the founding, it was very important for the United States to maintain as its primary relationships with Germany, even before the unification, with Prussia, with Paris, and with London. In the last few years, as Germany and France have become weaker, and as has the United Kingdom, Donald Trump realized that if we are to ensure the progress and safety of Western civilization, that the line in Europe is no longer the line that runs from Paris to Berlin and back to London. It is a line that starts in Warsaw and goes down to Bucharest. People who understand what happens when they lose their freedoms. People who have been on the front lines in terms of promoting basic human value, the right to be free, the right to express oneself, and the right to stand up to tyrants. That's why when President Trump came into office, he reversed the Obama-era policies where Obama was withdrawing American forces from Europe. That is not something that is understood, certainly in Western Europe, or it's not appreciated. And he began to move forces into the East because he knows that Putin is a malefactor. He's a bad actor. And that was his response to those in Eastern Europe who were spending money on their own defense, but did need a boost from the United States in the form of an American presence, in the form of American deterrent power. And that's what kept Vladimir Putin at bay. When Joe Biden and Kamala Harris came into office, They went back to the Obama policies. They withdrew American forces from Europe and said, welcome to Mr. Putin. And we have seen the consequences of that retreat.
I'd like to add to that sort of a big picture thing. Donald Trump is someone who admires people who help themselves. And I think the United States looks at Eastern Europe in general, Romania in particular, and says, you know what it's like to be suppressed. You know what it's like to not have a free press. You know what it's like to not be able to determine your own destiny. You know what it's like to have your people live in poverty and your children have no confidence in their future. And so the one thing I've learned in getting to know President Trump and other people who are around him is how much they value people who are willing to stand up and join them. We understand America's going to be the senior partner in this, but a lot of our relationship with Romania and all the Eastern European countries is how are you going to contribute? What are you going to do? And when Secretary Wilkie talks about Western European countries who basically say, well, we're going to, America should do it, or, we really don't feel we should have to contribute to our national security, or we think it's going to be better to trade with China, trade with Russia, and therefore not, and basically disarm. Romania gets it. Romania understands what happens. And so I think that when you think of someone like President Trump, or again, the people around him, understand and appreciate a country which is willing to step up and stand shoulder to shoulder with us. So I look ahead at a relationship between the United States and Romania as a very strong one as we go forward.
As you look at it, Romania now has a brighter light, the way you were talking about Romania. The way I see Romania is that it lacks leadership. When you think about America, the United States of America, you think about leaders. Even if you're looking around Romania to Poland, Hungary, Ukraine, even in Russia, even though it's not a good example, of course, but you do see leaders. We do not have leaders. Romania does not have winners, and that is a big problem. I don't know if you can find a solution for that. I don't know if you have seen any of our politicians, President Iohannis, the Prime Minister Ciolacu, or Mr. Ciucă, or the others, but we do not have leaders, and that's a big problem. Therefore, how could Romanian leaders right now position themselves in order to have opportunities when it comes to relations with America?
I would never presume to act like Kamala Harris and try to interfere or comment on the internal policies or politics of a friendly state. That's what Democrats do, much to the consternation of our closest friends, particularly here in Eastern Europe. But I will tell you how Donald Trump has approached this. He has watched Kamala Harris and Joe Biden reject the notion of America greatness. He has watched them denigrate their own country, not only at home but abroad. I mean, we have a United Nations ambassador whose first speech to that body was an attack on the very founding of her country, the country she's supposed to represent. And as I've said many times, a leadership that cannot defend the nation rhetorically certainly will not defend it kinetically. So my advice to anyone in the West, and because Western values, the Western values that started in the Judean desert with Abraham, then moved to Athens, to Rome, to London, and to the United States, those need to be celebrated and nurtured, that we are different, that we promote the primacy of the individual citizen, and that we have to celebrate that history. You know, in the American context, the late General Colin Powell used to say that the American soldier has done more for world peace than all the UN agencies, all the self-serving Hollywood telethons will ever do. And that evidences a pride in your nation's place. This nation has a very long history, and certainly in the last 30 years, a history where people stood up, 30, 40 years, stood up to tyrants and have established a new way. But the way you maintain that is to celebrate your history and take stands and that's the only way you will succeed. And people have to expect that of their leaders.
I just want to point out that when President Trump, his first address to the United Nations, he, and I'm not going to get the words right, but he basically said, the United States is done with telling you how to think or what kind of governance to have or who your leaders should be. It's up to you. And again, I'm only speaking for myself, but I look at a country like Romania. You won your freedom.
Yeah.
And if you don't like your leaders, guess what? You have the ability to change them. I mean, that is the essence of American greatness, is that the people, they don't like the leadership, vote them out and you get new ones. And we tend to do it with great regularity. And for any other country which is saying, how are you going to help us find your leaders? We're not going to help you find your leaders. You're going to do it, and you're going to be the better for it.
Well, actually, we do have elections, which are around the corner here as well, not just in America, on 24th of November. Therefore, yes, we do have the chance exactly in 1 month almost. But let's get back just a little bit to Ukraine. When it comes to Romania, what role could Romania have in Ukraine's reconstruction? Of course, we're talking about years and years for now, or maybe 1 year. Mm-hmm. Nobody knows that. But do we have a role in Ukraine's reconstruction?
Absolutely.
How?
And so do your neighbors in Eastern Europe. But we have to set the predicate first.
Definitely.
And the predicate is to make sure that Ukraine remains a free and independent state. And that once that is established, and I do believe, and again, I don't speak for President Trump, but I do believe he wants to ensure that Ukraine has the means to defend itself, because he showed that. Obama, Biden, when Putin was aggressive, sent the Ukrainians helmets, blankets, and meals ready to eat. When Donald Trump got into office, in part because of the advice he was receiving from KT and her staff, he stopped sending them helmets, blankets, and meals ready to eat and started sending them artillery shells and precision-guided munitions that could take out Soviet tanks and Russian tanks and Russian troops. It's often the same thing, Soviet and Russian. Donald Trump, when he got into office, had already reversed that. He will go back to that, I believe. But once they are stable and not subject to aggression, they have enormous resources, agriculture resources, they have energy resources. The cooperation that they can give the people of Romania in developing energy, fishing, commercial transportation on the Black Sea would be invaluable. It would change the calculus in the Eastern European economy. And I think those are the kinds of things that can be done when Ukraine is stabilized. Because as I've said, the three most important nations in terms of America's interest in Europe are Poland, Romania, and Ukraine. Those three, because you're on the front line. And as long as you are there and viable and vibrant and vital, that's a warning to Mr. Putin. So Romania would have to play a very important part, not only for Ukraine, but also for the future of Romania.
Yeah.
Ms.
So we look
McFarland?
forward to a terrific relationship with a new Trump administration, and whichever the Romanian people choose for their own governance, we certainly look forward to cooperation and peace and prosperity for all of us.
Let's go with cooperation then. China, North Korea, Israel, Iran, United States of America, Western world. Are we witnessing actually a second Cold War? You've been mentioning it at the beginning when we started talking.
Well, I think we will have a major conflagration if the United States doesn't restore the primacy of its deterrent power. If we don't put in place leaders who understand that the threat to America can be confronted, and that if America does not confront that threat, then the world will be entirely destabilized. I mean, think about this. If you look at North Korea, Iran, and Russia, these are failed states. They offer the world nothing except terror. China is an interesting problem because of its sheer size, but it also is an economy built on straw. because they have reimposed Maoist restrictions on the growth of their economy. I mean, they have once again built a concentration camp system that would be envied by Stalin. They are repressing their own people. The nations around them know that they're a threat, and they are arming to deter Chinese aggression. It would be President Trump's hope to bring China into the family of nations, but he also has tools at his disposal to punish China for aggression. They need America's economy more than we need China's economy. And if you look at what's happened in the last few years, particularly starting under Trump, our economy is close to not only dwarfing, but doubling the size of the Chinese economy. But we can only sustain that if we believe in ourselves and if we restore and reverse that decline in other forms of American power that Kamala Harris represents.
And I would say that even as opposed to 2 years ago, or the first Trump terms, Trump understood this fundamental thing that most politicians never understood because they're not businessmen. He understood that China needs to export to us, sell stuff to us more than we need to buy it from them. We have a lot of other options for cheap goods. So that's an advantage that President Trump could use and did use in the trade war with China, and I think successfully won the trade war with China. Now, fast forward to where we are today, the Chinese economy is far more vulnerable than it was. They've not recovered from COVID. They have some structural problems in their own economy. They have massive debt. They have empty cities. They built all these cities and apartment buildings. Nobody's going to be in them. Their population is dwindling. They have a demographic time bomb facing them. And then if you look at sort of how they push their way around the world, it's called wolf warrior diplomacy, where they have done trade deals with countries where they've said, we'll loan you the money, we'll build you a port, it's going to be terrific for you. And then all of a sudden, the country can't pay it back, and China says, great, we'll take the port. And so the way they've gone around the world, they've not found friends around the world. They've found countries to exploit. And countries have gotten fed up with it and are tired of it. And if you look at even Asia right now, if you look at Japan, Japan is increasing its defense budget. They historically have not. So is Korea. So are the Philippines. So I think that there's a new opportunity to deal with China, not by going to war with China, but by using our economic weapons, using our alliances, and then building a strong deterrent so that China is not going to cause trouble as it goes forward. President Trump has dealt with Xi Jinping. And let me just close by saying the example that Xi Jinping understands about President Trump. In the early days of the Trump administration, the Syrians were using chemical weapons and gassing their own people. I was in the Oval Office with President Trump, and he said, we're going to take out the military site, the aircraft, the sites, the bases where the Syrians were using to launch their chemical weapons attacks against their people. So President Trump said, okay, tell the Pentagon I want to come up with some options. He chose some options. It was really just a few weeks into his presidency. And then he said, well, we're going to make the move. I'm going to tell the military to go ahead with it, and they're going to conduct a bombing raid. And so I and others said, but wait a minute, President Trump, you're just about to go to Mar-a-Lago, and you're going to have the first meeting with the Chinese president, Xi Jinping. If this doesn't go well, if for some reason, something goes wrong, we don't succeed in our attack, whatever goes wrong, you are going to have the whole world watching. And Xi Jinping is going to be sitting right next to you at dinner. And that is going to set the tone of your relationship with China for your entire presidency. So he said, no, we're going to go ahead and do it. I trust the military, and so he did. So in the middle of the dinner at Mar-a-Lago, I was in the White House Situation Room as the raid was going on. And it was 100% successful, thanks to the United States Navy and their guided missile destroyers. But President Trump has his aide comes up to him and whispers in his ear, President Trump, the raid has succeeded, 100% effectiveness. We've taken out the airfields. And so President Trump, sitting right next to Xi Jinping, turns to him and says, I just want to tell you that we have launched an attack against the Syrian airfields who were killing their own people with chemical weapons, and it's been 100% successful. And President Trump loves to tell this story. He said, Xi Jinping stopped, and he said to the translator, repeat. And so translator repeated it. And then he continued, and he said, repeat again. And then President Trump said, and I watched Xi Jinping with a great, big, beautiful piece of chocolate cake. And he was eating that chocolate cake. And all I could think, I was sitting in the White House Situation Room watching this, was, you know, Xi Jinping knows how he's going to have to deal with Donald Trump. This is not the same old guy. He's been pushing around. The country, the America's been pushing around for a long time. So I am not at all concerned about the ability of President Trump to deal with the Chinese.
And one other thing that KT often points to is that China has no energy.
Yes, true.
China can be choked off in a matter of minutes because they can't sustain their economy with what they have. I mean, they have the world's largest supply of dirty coal, and that's incredibly inefficient. So we control that lever as well.
Final questions.
Yes.
You, Mr. Wilkie, said that you've been to Romania once before, around 21 years ago, something like that. So it's been a while, and it's your first time here, Ms. McFarland. So how did you expect to see Romania today, and how did you find it, actually?
Well, let me start by saying before I came here, I was a friend and associate of President Reagan's ambassador to Romania in the 1980s, a fellow named David Funderburg, who wrote a wonderful book called Pinstripes and Reds, where he talked about the deep state elements in our government then who did not understand, particularly at the State Department, the Romanian people's desire to break free of communism. Ronald Reagan understood it, but there were people in the government who would not work to fulfill his vision of freedom for all of Eastern Europe. So that is where I learned about the struggle of the Romanian people. What I've seen is a nation that, you know, broke those chains not very long ago, and just in a few short years has become a dynamic force in the East to the point where the once and future President of the United States says you're absolutely vital for American national security. I think you have enormous potential. The potential of cultivating the energy in the Black Sea, but also the potential of mining and taking advantage of the tremendous mineral resources that have been part of Romania's heritage, its inheritance, its natural inheritance since Roman times. And I think if you have a government that understands that can bring in partners, not just from Eastern Europe, but from the United States, to develop those resources, expand business, then the future is very bright.
Well, I hope we won't remain just with the potential, and our leaders will understand that as well. Ms. McFarland.
Okay, I'm going to have two completely non-political, non-geostrategic observations.
Please do so.
I was not expected to see how beautiful Bucharest is, with these magnificent 18th, 19th century buildings. Now, some of them have an opportunity to be fixed up a little bit. Yeah. But to me, I look at that, and that's a symbol of a country that has enormous possibility and opportunity, if you take it. The other thing, and this is probably the last thing any of your listeners want to hear, I'm a New Yorker. And in New York, the most famous, sought-after beauty treatment places and skin treatment are run by Romanians. It's Romanian women who have come from Romania to the United States, and it is like the premier place if you want to go for beauty. And as I look around Romania, and particularly the women, you're a really attractive people.
And Donald Trump's chef at Mar-a-Lago is Romanian.
Is Romanian, so there you go.
No way.
Yes, indeed.
Well, now we know. Thank you so much. Thank you for being this open. Thank you for the analysis. Thank you for being here today. And I'm looking forward to seeing you again here in Romania, here at Aleph News.
Honor and a pleasure.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much.